But the idea of the citizens is to take advantage of the housing stock in Lisbon for a more inclusive city. So inclusion is a topic of climate change. And they say that this can be done by improving energy transition and follow the model of the 15-minute city. So this was also, I don't know if you are all familiar with the model of the 15-minute city, which well, actually has gained quite a lot of stage in the last couple of years during the pandemic by Moreno. So the idea of the neighborhood as a self-efficient area where citizens can enjoy their life but also produce goods and services. The third area has to do with mobility. And the idea of citizens here is to limit the circulation of cars. Actually, their idea is quite massive. I think that in the newspapers also came out this news about the reduction of 80% of cars in the city in the next few years. So the limitation of cars through policies, and this is also interesting, the idea to work at the metropolitan scale. So citizens felt that this local scale, the municipal scale, is not the most adequate one to work on mobility. So the proposal is to work at the metropolitan scale and to increase public transportation and pedestrian access in the city. And here they also make a reference to another model which comes from Spain, from Barcelona, which is the super blocks. So the idea to somehow replicate the idea of the super blocks in Lisbon. Then we have energy efficiency. And here citizens took advantage of some of the information that was shared by the experts. So we had 4 experts at the beginning of this assembly sharing their knowledge. And one of the information that was provided is that 49% of the pollution in Lisbon comes from transport and 30% comes from other services. So citizens took advantage of this information to say we have to work directly on these sources of pollution in the city and to promote social housing based on partnerships with private companies but also with the third sector. Then we have another area, I'm about to finish, which is about the relationship with the municipality. This was also one of the most unexpected to me. So again, the relationship with the public authority is matters for climate change. Here citizens propose to enhance the coordination between public authorities. This is very specific in Portugal because basically it's about the coordination between the municipal level and the district level, which is quite strong in political terms in this country. So a better articulation between municipality and district governments, but also the creation of a municipal ombudsman in Lisbon, which for yeah, but so this is an ongoing discussion actually to have a new ombudsman in Lisbon, and so citizens took advantage of this discussion, which is ongoing, to basically reinforce the idea of having this statutory body. And then the environmental education, which for citizens should rely on the involvement of public organizations, citizens, companies, and mostly schools. They say that environment should be introduced in the curriculum of the schools. This is an interesting debate to have, not just in Lisbon, maybe at the country level. Maybe Luísa will share something about that. And also a very specific idea, which is to use the gamification as a way to to innovate also the learning process of students. The last area is about consumption and behavior change. So here citizens say that the increase of environmental literacy is needed in Lisbon, and they highlight each one's responsibilities in the consumption chain. So here the focus is very much on the individual. And they say that social awareness can be raised through partnerships that the city council can promote with public and private bodies, and they give some very interesting examples of how daily activities, daily activities in citizens' life can also be a way through which citizens can raise their awareness. For example, they say that introducing information in the soap operas could be a way to reach everybody, but also to use sport teams to promote new values. So, to use also these more, very close organizations to the citizens and to the daily life of citizens. Then I will stop and introduce my very dear speakers. I just want to say one last thing, which is these areas were proposed by citizens who participated to the citizen council, to the citizen assembly, who were roughly around 50 citizens. These were citizens that were randomly selected on a stratified basis, but these were also citizens that registered to participate to the citizen assembly. This is a very specific characteristic also of the Citizen Assembly of Lisbon. So there was not a random selection in the city, but there was the opening of a registration stage, and on the basis, this database actually was used to then do the stratified random selection. Also, for you to know, the stratified random selection took into account 5 main criteria. The first was gender, the second was the date of birth, the third was the neighborhood of residence, work, or study. So it was not only residents, but also people working and studying in Lisbon. The fourth was the professional status, and the last, education. The next citizen assemblies, the next editions, of the Citizen Assembly of Lisbon will be on maybe different topics. We don't know. This is a decision of the city council. But the first one was on climate change, and that's why we are here. So we are here with 4 keynote speakers. Let me introduce first Professor Graham Schmidt, who is a professor of politics and director of the Center for the Study of Democracy in the School of Social Sciences at the University of Westminster. His main research interests are in democratic theory and practice, particularly democratic innovations, participatory democratic institutions, and their relationship with climate governance and other long-term political challenges. He is the founding chair of the Knowledge Network of Climate Assemblies, KNOCA, funded by the European Climate Foundation, a collaborator of with the Global Participatia Network, and chair also of the Foundation for Democracy and Sustainable Development. Given his role as a founding chair of the KNOCA, we would like really much, and of course also based on his huge experience as a scholar, we would really like to hear from Professor Schmidt about the role of climate assemblies, what challenges they respond to, but also what opportunities they open today. And we would like also to know insights from current practices, which is actually what KNOCA is doing. It's the main mission of this network is the collection of practices And let me say also that CNOCA is a very new network, celebrated 1 year a couple of weeks ago, more or less. So if Professor Schmidt could share some knowledge on this, would be wonderful. Then we have Professor Frank Fischer, who is Professor Emeritus, and he taught politics and global affairs at Rutgers University in the United States, and public policy and planning at the Bluestein School of Planning and Public Policy. He is also a senior faculty fellow at the University of Kassel in Germany, where he teaches global public policy, US foreign policy and comparative and global environmental politics. He is a research associate at the Center of Environmental Policy Research at the Free University of Berlin, and his main institution, if I'm not wrong, Professor Fischer, is now Humboldt University in Berlin. So he is currently also writing a book on the impact of climate change on democratic governance. And together with Professor Plyapong Boossabong, who is an assistant professor at the Chiang Mai University School of Public Policy, and also to say that his research interests include public policy, deliberative policy analysis, local governance, urban food and agriculture, and environmental governance. So together, Professor Fischer and Professor Boossabong will focus on the role of climate assemblies for environmental governance. In particular, they will share their knowledge about an ongoing project in Thailand and present a specific practice in the city of Khon Kaen. I hope I say this correctly. So in this case, citizen deliberation does not strictly follow a specific model of citizen assembly, even though it is very much influenced by the Western experiences with citizen assemblies. So they will stress how citizen deliberation over policy is made in partnership with the government in this case. So, and then last but not least, Professor Luísa Schmidt. Let me also, sorry, because the other speakers cannot, sorry. So Professor Luísa Schmidt is a principal researcher at the Institute of Social Sciences at the University of Lisbon. She is a co-founder of environmental sociology in Portugal and also of the Observatory of Environment, Territory and Society, Observa. She's a member of the research group Environment, Territory and Society, like me, but she's of course she's a senior researcher, and of the scientific committee of the doctoral program on climate change and sustainable development policies, which started in 2009. She's a member of several international committees and advisory boards on these topics, and she has also taken part to national surveys on environmental values and practices in Portugal. But she has also led national and international projects on climate change policies. She's been appointed as an ambassador of the Portuguese Alliance for the Sustainable Development Goal 14 within the UN Global Compact Network, Portugal. So alongside Professor Schmidt has equally contributed a lot to the study and promotion of citizen engagement approaches to climate change in Portugal. So we would really like to hear from you what's your take on emerging trends of citizen participation and also deliberation on climate change, and how this nexus works, if it works, in Portugal. So if you can give us some insights also from the field, from your experience on the field, that would be wonderful. Without further saying, I thank you again, and also thanks all the people here in the room. And I would give the stage to Graham Schmidt, Professor Graham Schmidt.
Thank you, Roberto, for inviting me. You can hear me okay, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I want to first make an apology because we have some work going in the house next door, and also in our house. So if you start hearing hammering and things, it's not.
Well, Graham, we have the first day of the ECPR school just on the other room, so we also have some problems of.
And we have the airplanes.
And we have the airplanes very close to the university.
Okay. So we all understand that we're working in between. Okay, I shall share my screen. Let's try and get that going. I'm assuming you can see my screen okay, yeah?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so perfect. So once again, thank you for the invitation to come and speak. I'm going to talk a little bit about climate, the climate assembly, the wave of climate assemblies that's happening in Europe, particularly at national level, but I'll also have something to say about the local level and can obviously answer some specific questions about that when we get to the discussion time. Sorry, I'm just trying to figure out how this moves forward. There we go. Oh, hang on a second. Sorry, I don't know what's going on. Sorry. Let's try again. I'll start again. I realised I started on my last slide. That's not the best way to start. So I'm going to try and draw some learning from the first wave of climate assemblies that have happened particularly in Europe. And this is an emerging phenomenon. I just want to clarify, and I'm not quite sure what the knowledge of people in the room is, so I'm just going to very briefly go through what I understand the climate assembly for this paper to be. Obviously, in the next paper, they'll be talking more a broader concept, but for what it means for the way I'm thinking about it, this is where we bring together randomly selected everyday people to learn, deliberate, and make recommendations on aspects of the climate crisis. And really, this fits in with what the OECD are calling a deliberative wave. And in many ways, I think climate assemblies are at the leading edge of that wave, simply because we've now had, I think, depending upon how you define an assembly, we've had about 9 national assemblies in the last 3 or 4 years. We've had numerous local assemblies using this model. And I think at the moment, sort of citizens' assemblies are very much focusing on areas of climate practice. And the simple aim of climate assemblies is to bring, as I like to say, bring the wisdom of everyday people into climate governance. So climate governance is dominated by policy experts and other forms of expertise. This is a way of bringing insight and interest groups, etc. This is a way of bringing the voice of everyday people into climate governance process, at least in principle. So just to give you a sense of where this wave has come from, the Citizens' Assembly in Ireland, which happened between 2016 and 2018, is famous for its recommendation on abortion, which led to a constitutional referendum which liberalised abortion provision in Ireland. What isn't so well known is that Citizens' Assembly also looked at climate. It spent 2 weekends looking at climate issues, which then went forward through Parliament to the government and actually led to became part of the National Climate Plan. In terms of dedicated climate assemblies, the first one happened in France. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Quickly followed by one in the UK, in Scotland, in Denmark, in Germany. We've got one just finished in Austria and also in Spain, and one's happening in Luxembourg. So, this is quite an interesting phenomenon that this number of national governments have felt the need to run these assemblies. And of course, we've also seen the emergence of a global assembly. This map tries to capture some of the local assemblies that have happened around Europe. It's not complete, but it gives you a sense that this is over the last 2 or 3 years. It's not only happening at national level, which are the orange pins, but also more local in municipalities and regions across Europe. Probably just to give you a sense for those of you who aren't familiar, probably the most famous assembly is the French Citizens' Convention, which was asked to how France could cut greenhouse gas emissions by at least 40% by 2030 in a spirit of social justice. That was part of its commitment to the Paris Agreement. Actually, I've just realised that says 250 members. That should be 150. I'm sorry, the slide is wrong. 150 members came together over 7 weekends, plus 2 online sessions. So this is a really significant initiative and commitment by those citizens. And they in the end produced 149 draft laws, regulations and referendums. They actually did draft those laws, regulations and referendums working with legal specialists. Macron had promised that he would forward these with no filter. Actually, in the end, there was quite a bit of cherry picking, but we can talk about that later. There was an additional weekend after the Assembly recommendations, just about six to 8 months later, where the citizens came back and reviewed what the government had done, which was a real innovation. And we also saw a civic association of convention members emerge who actually provide ongoing scrutiny of what the government and other actors are doing with their recommendations. There has been impact on climate law. There's an estimate that 50% of the proposals in some form made it into the law, about 10% of them unmodified. There's always that question about whether it would have happened anyway. I mean, there's a sort of, there's a counterfactual that we can't tell, that we obviously can't measure. But what's been really interesting in France is because the president very publicly launched and received the recommendations and then didn't follow through with most of them, it actually became a topic of broader public debate. And my colleagues in France tell me now it's very hard not for members of parliament not to talk about climate before, whereas before it was a kind of minor issue. And they think there's a real important role that the convention has played in promoting a broader public debate. Just to give you a sense of a couple of others, the Scottish Climate Assembly was interesting because it asked how Scotland could tackle the climate emergency, which meant that actually it wasn't just about mitigation, it was also questions of adaptation, which also has been adopted more recently in Spain. And again, the Danish Climate Assembly, I think, is quite interesting because they explicitly asked the Assembly to contribute to the climate action planning process that happens annually within Denmark. So there was a much clearer link in Denmark between the Assembly and the policy making process. And I think that's a really interesting innovation. So just briefly, why climate assemblies? And there's a lot to say here, and Frank and I would quite happily chat about this for ages. But I think it's well recognised that political buy-in and public support for sustained implementation of ambitious climate policy is currently insufficient. And the argument is that assemblies can play a role, not the role, but can play a role in sort of pushing for, sustaining that sort of political priorities into policy making. It's actually really helpful potentially at breaking political deadlocks, because very often politicians will be talking about the public's not willing to act in a certain way, or established interest groups will be blocking change. And actually hearing the voice of citizens can provide political cover for public administrations to act. And as I'll talk about later, it actually tends to generate more robust and ambitious climate policy. Typically, citizens are ahead of current policy. It increases the legitimacy of social action. And of course, many governments are really committed to ideas of citizen participation, and this is a way of realising that. So just briefly, and again, I apologise for some of you who know this already, but I just want to clarify for those who maybe not. These assemblies use a form of random selection. It's usually, but not always, and I recognise it was slightly different in Lisbon. They typically use a two-stage process, which is called a civic lottery, where letters are sent out to randomly selected households. You usually oversample those in poorer areas because we know we tend to get less. When you get those responses back, what a surprise! It tends to be skewed towards those people who are more educated, those people who have more political efficacy. But at that point, we apply quotas to ensure the diversity of characteristics. So Scotland, I think, is a really interesting example. They made sure that their final assembly looked like the wider population in terms of age, in terms of gender, income, ethnicity, geography, urban, rural distinctions, disability, and finally, and I think this is really important in climate assemblies, the attitude towards climate change. One of the things that politicians often, or politicians and other actors who are trying to undermine climate assemblies say is, it's full of climate activists. Why on earth should we listen to this? Well, in Scotland, in the UK, and a couple of other countries, they've selected on people's attitudes towards climate change. So in the UK, the question was, how concerned are you about climate change? And we have national survey evidence about that. So they made sure that there were people in the Assembly who were very concerned, right the way through to not concerned at all. And I think that's a really important, for me, and we can talk about whether that's the right thing or not. Some assemblies do and some assemblies don't. But if nothing else, it's a really good, robust defence against the argument that this is full of climate activists. So what does random selection do? It ensures a diversity of perspectives. Elsewhere, I've made the argument that when we're thinking about long-term decision making, we need to include perspectives from different social perspectives, because they will have different perspectives on what the interests of future generations are. And also random selection, historically, this is why it was used initially in Athens, was to bypass entrenched interests. You don't have your usual suspects, your usual interest groups in the room. You do have them there as giving evidence, but it's not them making decisions. It's also a way of recognizing that, or sort of ameliorating the problems that are generated by electoral cycles. So the first element is random selection. The second is deliberation. This is where which is really important for having a diversity of participants, because that allows us to bring a diversity of perspectives to bear. Members hear from and question a range of witnesses. They may be expert witnesses, advocates, or people with direct experience. There's processes of active facilitation to ensure it's a deliberative process. And it has been said that I quite like this sort of quote, I think it's from Klaus Offer, where he says that this kind of deliberation is fact regarding. People take knowledge seriously. It's other regarding. We take other perspectives seriously, and it's future regarding, because it takes us out of our everyday madness into a space where we can actually start thinking about long-term issues. So just briefly, before I talk about some of the experience from climate assemblies, what is the Knowledge Network on Climate Assemblies? Roberto said something about this. It's a European network with the simple aim of trying to improve the commissioning, design, implementation, impact, and evaluation of climate assemblies. It was launched just over a year ago. It already has over 500 members from various different types of experience of assemblies. Some people have no experience, right way through to people who have run these things. It's led by myself with the Danish Board of Technology, and as I said, funded by the European Climate Foundation. We have 4 priorities. One is to try and document climate assembly practice, so we actually know what's going on around the world. Secondly, trying to identify and disseminate best practice. So I do a lot of work where we talk to governments and public officials who are thinking of doing these sorts of things, or interest groups who are promoting them or sometimes challenging them, and actually trying to help them understand what will work best or what will work well in their jurisdiction. We're trying to shape future trends, and I'll talk about what some of those future trends might be at the end of the presentation. And most importantly, we try to co-create the future, in the sense we're actually trying to take the idea of a network seriously. So we we commission knowledge development projects on different aspects of climate assembly practice. I'll be referring to a bit of that in the next 10 minutes or so. So what are the key learnings from these assemblies? And I'm mostly going to draw from the national assemblies, but I'll also flavour it with a little bit of stuff from local assemblies as well. The first is, the evidence is very clear that citizens are willing and able to come to well-reasoned recommendations on what to do. And this is really important in itself, because a lot of cynics and skeptics will say citizens aren't willing, citizens aren't able, this is too complex, citizens don't care. And actually, I think what's really important here is the power of the invite, actually actively inviting people to come and participate in these processes. So many people, when they receive an invitation, say, I think this is a scam. I think someone's trying in some clever way to scam me. Because they don't believe that they're being given this kind of opportunity to participate in the political process. Almost always when they walk into the room, they're saying, I'm not sure why I've been asked. But always when they walk out of the room, I would say 99.5% of participants have had a real peak experience, something which has been really important to them. And many of them would like to do it again. When we explain to them that this is done through random selection, and so it's very unlikely that they'll be asked to do it again, they're actually very disappointed. So it's really interesting that people their political efficacy really increases. I've already pointed out that the recommendations from these processes tend to be more progressive than existing government policy. And we are starting to see some impacts of these assemblies. I don't think we should be surprised that the impacts aren't as good as we expect, as we would hope, because this is a new practice. This has only been something we've started doing in the last 2 to 3 years. We obviously have a longer history of practice with citizens' juries and consensus conferences and other forms of deliberative process. But we shouldn't be surprised that this new form of democratic engagement isn't having the kind of impact that some of its advocates would hope for. Well, I was in a conference the other day, a couple of days ago, where a colleague of mine from Scotland said it's taken us 300 years to get where we are with representative democracy. Why do we expect deliberative democracy to land fully formed? Why do we expect it to work immediately? So I think we have to temper some of the issues around impact, and I'll talk some more about that later. But certainly in France and Ireland, we can see a strong relationship between the recommendations and climate laws. In the UK, the Independent Committee for Climate Change is actually using the UK Climate Assembly findings in order to structure its carbon budgeting. And it's also now using deliberative methods more in order to investigate certain elements of UK practice. Again, it's improved parliamentary scrutiny in the UK. In Denmark, there's a promise to use the findings of the Assembly in the same way that they do with the findings from social partnerships from different social sectors. I've already mentioned in France, it sparked large-scale public debates. And in all of these assemblies, one of the really significant impact is the efficacy of the participants, the way that they become much more politically engaged, much more politically interested, much more looking for ways to carry on being engaged within climate and democratic politics. One thing we have to do, though, is generalise with care. I mean, I'm talking to a bunch of social scientists, and I think this is really important that we don't kind of think that all climate assemblies are the same. So, for example, with the first 6 assemblies, there are actually 5 different relationships to government, or relationships to not just the government, to the political system, and different degrees of formalisation. So the French Assembly was linked to the president. The Danish Assembly was linked to the administration. The Irish and the Scottish Assembly was linked to Parliament and government. The UK Assembly was linked to parliamentary committees. And the German Assembly was run by civil society organisations which were trying to impact on political parties. My argument would be that they are all really different. They're different ecosystems of institutions, which means we shouldn't expect the same thing from each of them. So we've got to be really careful when people generalise about climate assemblies this or climate assemblies that. Actually, we need to be much more careful about, well, how did this climate assembly function within the political system? We also need to recognise that they've had different remits. Some have been broad and some have been very tight. Most of the national assemblies have been very broad assemblies, basically help. How do we deal with the climate crisis? But there are more specific ones. So, for example, in Poland, there was one that was done specifically on flooding in Gdansk. In Devon, in the UK, there was one that was specifically focused on 2 issues which had been generated through stakeholder engagement as the most pressing issues for Devon. So, some are broad, some are tight. Some focus just on mitigation, some on adaptation. And the extent to which participants can influence the content of the assembly differs. So the Danish Assembly, for example, they were they've had 2 phases of the assembly. In the first phase, they learnt about climate impacts in Denmark and then chose the topics they wanted to focus on. In the second round, they just chose them without learning about the issues. And it was really interesting to compare the 2. And actually, most people think you need to do a process of learning first. Governance changes. I'm not going to say too much about this. I can come back to this, but there are 3 different forms of that governance takes in terms of trying to get the independence of these associations. The mandate and follow-up changes. In some of these, the government has promised to respond. In others, that hasn't been the case. In some assemblies, we've seen additional review weekends where the assemblies have reconvened to review what has happened. And we've seen different degrees of politicisation, from a sort of accommodation within existing practices, and probably Denmark's the most accommodative, through to a sort of transformatory logic, which I think we can see in France. So let's be aware, though, that, as I said before, there are limitations in current practice, and there's a real danger that poor commissioning, poor design, poor implementation, poor follow-up may actually diminish their potential and may actually undermine climate policy. I have some concerns here that if climate assemblies are seen as a failure, actually this could have a bigger ramification for deliberative mini-publics more generally. So one of the reasons I was very happy to take on the chairing role of CNOCA was actually this was an opportunity to try to make these things work better, basically. And I think it's fair to say that the coupling between assemblies and the climate policy system has been poorly articulated. Very often these assemblies have been run, but commissioned by government with little thought as to how they are going to actually relate to the broader policy systems. And when you have something like 149 recommendations coming out of an assembly, they're going to go all over government. And the question is whether government and administration is ready and willing to respond to those. Not necessarily taking them all on, not necessarily following through with them, but at least considering them and having some process by which there is some form of integration. So let me just talk to you about a couple of pieces of Knocker work that's happened recently. We asked Eva Rovers, who is an activist in the Netherlands, and Yves I can never pronounce his surname, my friend Yves from the Federation for the Innovation in Democracy in Europe, and previously G1000 in Belgium, to come up with, to provide a report on what they take to be the key drivers of impact within assemblies. And they came up with 3 key drivers. The first was getting the right question. And here, making sure that, you're setting the expectations right of citizens. Are you looking for a question that actually generates, a whole range of different ideas like the Lisbon Assembly? Or are you looking for ones which focus on a particular policy challenge that's being faced at the moment? Or are you looking for citizens to generate that question? Secondly, what is the mandate? What's the promise in terms of how the government or other actors are going to respond? And what follow-up has been put in place? How is that response going to actually happen? And finally, and I think this is really interesting, is they pointed out that actually a real problem here is the communication strategy of most assemblies is pretty poor. We spend a lot of time focusing on the participatory element of it, not enough time with follow-up in terms of looking at the administration, but also not enough time thinking about how we communicate the assembly and its recommendations to key stakeholders and the broader public. And I think that's a really interesting, really missing area for work. What I'm just going to talk about now, though, is the second of these, because that's the bit that we're doing most work on at the moment. And this is basically, how do you prepare a public administration to deal with the outcomes of a climate assembly? There are lots of reasons why climate assemblies don't land in public administrations. One is most of the resources go into the design and implementation of the assembly itself, and there's no equivalent resourcing for preparing the public authority. There's no capacity building done within the public authority to ensure that it's ready and willing to respond to those recommendations. I can remember talking to a public administrator who was saying, my colleagues, the first time they hear about an assembly is when a report lands on their desk telling them what they need to do. And surprise, surprise, they're not very happy about that suddenly this random group of citizens, and here you're using the term random slightly differently, are suddenly telling them, this policy professional, what to do. And no work has been done to bring that professional into the process. So I think one of the really interesting things here is, for those of us who are interested in participatory democracy, we need to spend much less time thinking about the participation bit of it, because we actually know quite well how to do that, and much more on how do we prepare stakeholders and public authority and others to be ready and responsive to this. If of course, a big if we see the primary goal of these to be shifting policy. If we think the primary goal of these is something else, then we need to be thinking differently. But if we're trying to look to changes in public authority, we really need to spend as much time and resources on preparing the authority as we do supporting the citizens through the process. What often happens is you get these key political and bureaucratic actors who really support the assembly, give it time, give it effort, but often move on once it's finished to another project. So you kind of have the key sort of ambassadors for this, the key sort of political figures, the key bureaucratic figures, putting all their effort into running it and then moving on to something else. The person who put all her work into running the Scottish Climate Assembly, 3 months later she was on a new job. Where is the consistency? Where is the sort of follow-up process here? As I say, most other policy actors are unprepared and unfamiliar with the process. They get a report land on their desk and they ask, what is this report? They've typically been well prepared to deal with surveys and with interest groups and with traditional consultation, but they don't know what to do with recommendations that come from this group of 150 who have been thinking about these things for over 7 weekends. What kind of input is that? And finally, they rarely are timed to actually tie in well with climate policy cycles. So often these recommendations land when decisions aren't being made, and so there's a lack of connection. Okay, so just to say, in Canopa, we are starting to do some work about what it takes to land an assembly. We've got our first guidance, which was published at our annual meeting a few weeks ago, and trying to actually help public authorities don't just think about how you run these things, but think about how you respond to these things as well. And as much work needs to be done in the starting up phase to actually prepare for the recommendations to land. So just briefly, where do I think this work is going? I think that most of these assemblies have been on mitigation. I really think there's a real space, particularly somewhere like Portugal in terms of the heat waves that you're having there, but thinking about adaptation, using futures and scenario approaches. I think that's one area where climate assemblies have got a lot to offer. I think we've got to think carefully about how these integrate with other participatory approaches and think of these assemblies as just one element of an ecosystem of climate engagement. I think too many people talk as if this is the only thing we need to do, and then we've sorted out the climate crisis. I think that's a real mistake. And the third is, how can we begin to institutionalize? How can we begin to embed these processes into the climate policy system and just transition? Most of them have been one-off processes. You run an assembly and that's it. Well, can we think about how assemblies become part of the regular policy cycle? Can we think what that might look like? Can we think about how we can institutionalize these? And I've worked with a couple of European cities now and I think one of them is about to make a public announcement of saying that they are going to have a climate assembly which works on an annual cycle and feeds into their policy making process. And I think that's a really exciting development. So finally, the Knowledge Network on Climate Assemblies is open to everyone, even academics. And we would be delighted if you'd like to join us. If you don't want to join us, there's lots of information about, as we're trying to develop our understanding of assemblies around Europe and beyond. I invite you to go to the website and have a look around. And as I say, if it's a topic that interests you, please do join us. And I'd like to just thank you once again for inviting me. It's a real shame I couldn't be with you in person. Hopefully another time.
Thank you so much, Graham. This was really, really interesting. I really enjoyed your focus at the end on public authorities. It's interesting also because we have some civil servants in the room from Lisbon, so it's interesting also to deal with these issues about skills and capacity of the public.
You should have warned me there were civil servants in the room. I maybe have said something.
Yeah. Okay. So let's move to the next keynote. And then, according to the program, we will have a slot for question at the before the end of the seminar. So, Professor Frank Fischer and Professor Plyapong Boossabong, we are here to hear from you about your project in Thailand.
Okay.
Feel free to share the screen. I don't know if it's Professor Plyapong who will share.
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to start. I had told you that I wouldn't because somehow I managed to catch a cold. But I think I can get through this without too many interruptions.
Thank you, Professor Frank Fischer. And but please feel free if you don't feel so good to.
Yeah, okay. We see how it goes. I think it's okay.
Thank you.
So we want to report on a unique participatory deliberative project that emerged in a medium-sized town in the northeast of Thailand, Khon Kaen, in a country otherwise governed by a military regime. And in many ways, the practice emerged in opposition to the authoritarian practices of the central military government. It's especially important because its citizens' assemblies, or maybe here I should better say assembly of citizens, are more than just advisory. If there is wide enough agreement at the end of the citizen deliberations, the local government adopts the decisions and turns them into public policy. In the interest of time, I'll begin with a general description to be followed by Plyapong showing slides and which actually tell the story in a much more graphic kind of way. So, talking about taking advantage of a little-used constitutional provision calling for decentralized governmental structures, which mainly, to the degree that was used, focused on the need for periodic elections, not very much more. Drawing on that, taking advantage of the municipality of Khon Kaen initiated a well-developed, citizen-oriented deliberative process of urban well-developed citizen-oriented deliberative process for urban participatory governance. The approach was described by the town's mayor as a shift from working for the urban communities to working with them by allowing each community in the city to play a role as a sub-municipality with its own autonomy. In the process, the relations between the city, municipality, and the communities moved away from an earlier patron-client system in which to a participatory governance network that has allowed local residents and administrators to deliberately collaborate in formulating and deciding local policy issues. From this endeavor, the local government innovatively established a Department of Participation Promotion. The job of this department is to organize town meetings that involve citizen-based deliberative processes, basically citizens' assemblies, in other words, that bring the mayor, the local citizens, business, and relevant interest groups together to participate in formulating city policy decisions. Excuse me. To this end, the department helps to select a relatively random group of citizens to engage in preparing an agenda based on the problems and demands collected from local residents. The deliberative process begins with a set of working groups made up of these citizens from the sub-municipalities who develop scenarios and plans for dealing with the specific problems. These groups then examine, compare, and deliberate their plans with those of other community groups in the city, seeking to establish a degree of agreement among them before moving to a more general town meeting deliberation with a larger segment of the local citizenry. At the end of this process, the participants reassemble in larger groups, including now interested members of the public, to present their proposals for further deliberation at an open for all town meeting. In this more public setting, the city mayor and his staff are also present. If there's clear agreement at the end of these discussions, the municipality, with the consent of the mayor, adopts the plan and turns it over to the appropriate ministry for implementation. Throughout the deliberative stages, the process emphasizes the collection of presentation and examination of findings. Of special importance for the success of these deliberations has been the role of a group of collaborative experts who have supported the working groups. These involve a group of academics, mainly urban planners, from the local university, Sarakam, who refer to themselves as a think tank to facilitate the deliberations with information and analysis. And this is quite interesting. These people have actually drawn their ideas from what they learned in their graduate studies abroad, particularly in Europe and the United States. Such studies included theories of Habermas and Foucault and various other scholars focused on distribution, deliberation, and participation. More specifically, their thinking has been influenced by theories of deliberative democracy, the deliberative practices of participatory governance, collaborative planning, and deliberative policy analysis. That is, they learned these ideas from Europe and took them back home, which I think you'd have to call a genuine case of knowledge transfer. Drawing on these orientations, they created, as a first step, the deliberation standards designed to guide the town's policy participatory deliberations. The focus has been on ensuring that each participant would have an equal right to express their ideas and needs, learn from each other about possible solutions, get a chance to influence the decision process, and have an opportunity to frame further discussions and actions with fellow community members. They also pay careful attention to value conflicts that surrounded the various policy issues they dealt with, which could value issues which could disrupt and bring the deliberative process to an abrupt end, including problems related to authoritarian practices that are not uncommon in Thailand, especially given the military regime in charge of the country, or really I should say including the military regime. The second step focuses on facilitating the discursive exchanges among citizens. The planners collect and assemble relevant objective knowledge and information needed for effective policy decisions, in particular environmental decisions, often related to climate change, sometimes engaging in original research to better understand and clarify key aspects of the issues pertaining to the municipality. In particular, they have examined and mapped out the relations of the empirical dimensions of the problems to the normative and value implications of competing decisions. The ongoing process has demonstrated the important success that transcended the political gridlock that had often gripped the processes of municipal government in Khon Kaen. Among the more important examples have been the development of climate-related environmental disaster and emergency warning systems, especially as it pertains to flooding and water drainage, especially important in a country that has monsoon seasons. Another example, environmental example, has to do with the development and extension of a public transport system in the country that's normally plagued by traffic problems, like everywhere else, I guess. The municipality and the community groups have also decided to add goals of becoming a carbon neutral city to their policy deliberations and to transform all municipal markets to 100% solar energy. And yet another has been the development of various cultural projects to build social capital for solving environmental and other problems. For example, town meetings have led to collaboration in organizing local festivals, the building of city exhibitions, the creation of pedestrian streets for featuring cultural shows, shops selling local handmade products, the distribution of environmental information and sustainable agricultural products and food from the region. To support these activities, the town meeting has also contributed to the development of key symbols that represent the city's basic cultural identities throughout its history. For example, meetings have led to renovation of the city gate, a shrine, a monument to particular heroes, and things like that. These initiatives are part of an effort to use local cultural capital to promote sustainable city development, including environmental restoration. Citizens proposed the proposed a municipality to promote wooden Buddha statues made of folk artists as local projects, and to visit particular agencies, such as the environmental department, which then gives out souvenirs and rewards and things like this. The emphasis on Buddhism is focused on establishing an inner harmony between nature and human society, or the individual. City folks tales are also used, with streets being named after figures from tales. Further, the deliberative forums on culture have brought about the creation of creative spaces for climate and environmental events, including musical events designed to raise awareness of the issues facing the town and region. In addition, the deliberations succeeded more generally in establishing a common policy framework for determining and prioritizing sustainable future city development. The primary lesson from this successful deliberative innovation points to a division of a progressive mayor. In the mayor's view, representative democracy is insufficient. Rather than just having representatives make decisions for them, the mayor has argued that people should have the right to deal with their own needs through their own decision-making processes. Toward this end, he's spoken of his own mayoral role as that of facilitator rather than leader. And also important is the role of the think tank. In my own research of various deliberative projects, long-term success of such efforts typically depends on the presence of some form of participatory expertise to help deal with complex questions and to facilitate the deliberations without trying to influence the outcomes. There's much more to say, but I turn the rest over to my associate, Plyapong, whose earlier university was Marasarakam in this town, Konkan, which also supplied the think tank scholars. So, Plyapong.
Okay, just add some points and also show some pictures of the deliberative practice in the city of Konkan, which Frank already mentioned the whole process and the overview of the practice. As you might not have any chance to visit this city, just want to give a very brief information about the short history. The city actually is the independent region, the center of independent region in the old day before Thailand or Siam, as we know today, colonized them. So actually, the city is in the long history of conflict with the central domination of the country, and also it is the city, one of the cities that has a list of national and cultural assets in the area. If you have a chance, please come to visit. As I already mentioned, in the long history of the city, there has a long fight against national domination, as actually the Siam or Thailand colonized them. They has never been the independent region so far. And nowadays, in the authoritarian regime, as Frank repeat many times, people here actually know well, actually not only nationwide but worldwide, that people here usually against the centralization and authoritarian control of the national government. A lot of pro-democracy fighters from this this city, they very active, especially in mobilize the political movement against the authoritarian government. What I want to emphasize and actually just try to explain what Frank already mentioned is the key characteristic of the city that try to make different from other cities in Thailand. Firstly, they establish the division of participation promotion, which you cannot find such a division elsewhere. It's just only here in Khon Kaen. And to develop the city is not rely much solely on the role of the mayor and his team, but he just established the committee called Municipal Development Committee, which compiled with the public-private education and people partnership and change every 4 years. And as Frank already mentioned, 95 communities within the municipality has been decentralized. They has been decentralized from the national government, and then the municipality decentralized again, sub-decentralization, and call each community as the sub-municipality, as Frank already mentioned. I think it's very interesting to point this out. And a lot of voluntary groups, a lot of interest groups, active citizens here, and they also organize the working group on specific issue, including environmental issue, as a working group, which change every year. So it's very interesting to mention about them. And the deliberation here is not only about the deliberation among the municipal staff or head of the department, but it's moved like the spiral, move from inside the municipality to the meeting with the Municipal Development Committee, which I already mentioned. And it's very unique in Thailand. We don't have any Municipal Development Committee elsewhere. We compile with the different parties just only here. And they usually have the meeting with the expert and the meeting with the community leaders, the meeting among community members, which usually is this organic practice. But for the mini public, for each sector, which another cycle of the spiral, this gonna be something that Frank highlight. Is this a well-organized process led by think tanks? Is this the kind of random as well? The representative of key stakeholder from different sector in the city, they come and set agenda and point out their demand and also the result that they want to share. So this is a very interesting case that the municipality try to develop a kind of spiral deliberation, move from small to bigger, and the biggest one is the town hall meeting, as Frank already mentioned, and they organize both the indoor and outdoor. The indoor is for mostly for people who can mostly people work for the public organization or private organization who not really struggle for their life. I would say middle class. But for the outdoor, it usually organized on the weekend, and that's for people with middle or low income. And then they usually use the consensus from the meeting to bargain or negotiate with the regional and central government about what the city want to go for. They usually refer to the will of the people and ask for the support by the central government, but something that they can do by themselves with their autonomy, with their authority that they have. They usually endorse all of the agreement of the people in the strategic plan. So it's moved like this from small to larger. I think it's very interesting that the previous presentation mentioned about the limitation of the climate assembly that not really institutionalized or assimilate into the public policy cycle, but in this case, actually, the role of the citizen assembly already assimilate into the policy cycle of the city. Okay, and as Frank already mentioned, it's very important to point this out. The role of the think tank, very important. They usually help to organize the mini publics before the town hall meeting. I already mentioned that the meeting between the community members usually organic, but for this, it's well organized by the think tank who mostly graduate from abroad. And as Frank already mentioned, we talk with them, a lot of them, and also I take part as well. And this is very interesting. They usually use the kind of a lot of material to support deliberation. For example, of course, basic one, post-it, and they also use the Lego, for example, to ask people to build the scenario. And this process very important. Future first, and then thinking about how to reach there. Just want to show some photo from the activity. A lot of photos, so I cannot explain everything. But it's very interesting that when they end up with a kind of visualization of what the city should go for, and some keyword from the post-its, then the facilitator, the think tank, try to turn from the manual visualization to computer visualization. I kind of help to capture everything and use this as the kind of input for the town hall meeting, as Frank already mentioned. Just want to show some photo during the COVID-19. I think it's very interesting. Tracing back during 1 or 2 years during the COVID-19, and found that they still work on this and keep the momentum going, the spiral going. It's very interesting to see that all of the practice still alive during COVID-19, both indoor and outdoor. As you can observe, indoor they usually ask people to wear the mask. They call safety participation, and for the outdoor, they use a lot of public space to organize a meeting during the COVID-19. And think tank still active very much in terms of facilitate the process. And the mayor not come only the end of the process. Actually, he engaged in the process. You're gonna see this guy. He is the mayor. He not sit in the front. He joined the group. I think it's very good to see the kind of the attitude of the leader of the municipality. He just take part into the group, not the one who stand in the front of the activity. So it's very interesting to see that. I mean, especially in the context of authoritarian regime in Thailand. So it's rare, but it's meaningful. And they still have the town hall meeting, the big town hall meeting. So the governance system transformed from the role of representative, the formal representative, to extend just only the role of formal representative to lay people. They can have a chance to vote as well. The propose what they want the city to push forward, and also vote for them. So it's very interesting to highlight that. And you can see lay people have a chance to raise their voice, and it's the process that they can synergy can kind of develop the collaborative effort and kind of learning as well. It's empower space for them. the impact, Frank already mentioned a lot of impact. And yes, of course, it's about control, it's about the protection of fracking, which is the normal situation in the city. So they have a very good plan together and have a very collaborative effort to cope with the fracking situation. And as Frank already mentioned, they transform all the energy used in the local market owned by the municipality to be the clean energy, renewable energy, solar energy, 100%. So it's very interesting. And they also promote a lot of edible clean space, urban agriculture. During the COVID-19, Frank already mentioned about this. They transform all vacant land during the COVID-19 to be the vegetable garden to feed people during the crisis. And even now, it's not only the crisis of COVID-19, but it's also the crisis, the food crisis globally. So it's very interesting to see in the detail. And if you want to learn more about the city, you can just simply search the name of Khon Kaen and use the keyword deliberation. You're going to see some photo of this. Okay, and most of the impact Frank already mentioned. So I just want to show you some photo. I don't want to spend over time. And the challenge is bigger every year. The people want to engage. So it's bigger. The spiral need to engage larger people as people now very active. And of course, we still under the control of the military-led government. So still the ecosystem, as the previous presenter already highlight, it's very important to point out that this practice still under the ecosystem that dominate by the authoritarian regime. I'm sorry that I spend time a little bit more than the limitation. Thank you.
You were actually perfectly on time. It's 11:30, so it's perfect. Thank you very much, Professor Frank Fischer and Professor Plyapong Boossabong. This was very, very interesting. And it also reminded me some debate about whether participatory processes should take place in authoritarian countries. It's not a matter of whether they should, it's a matter of what do they do in those environments. So this is very interesting to see what's happening in Thailand. And also thank you, and this helps me introduce Professor Luísa Schmidt. It's very interesting to see how the governance flow works. So also the different moments with citizens, and not just citizens, also stakeholders and politicians, which opens a little bit the idea of participation apart from the citizen assembly themselves, which I think is something that Professor Luísa Schmidt also will refer to in her speech in Portugal. Also, for a very practical reason, the Citizen Assembly of Lisbon was the first one. So if we want to also learn from what's happened so far, we should look also at other settings where citizens have been invited, encouraged to voice. So, without further saying, maybe you can, because so I give you the, let's give the stage to, posso ficar aqui? Ou então não, fico ali se quiser mais fácil. Só vou jogar.
Mas espera aí, deixa-me pôr, é porque eu tive a fazer uma mudança.
Ah, ok.
Espera, como é que faz?
Era aqui?
Era aqui. Posso usar isto diretamente? Onde é que estão os... este PC. Espera aí que agora tenho que fazer outra coisa. Hello, good morning. it was very interesting to be. It's very good to be here, and it was very interesting to hear from you. Now as Roberto asked me, I'll show you a little bit what's happening here in Portugal regarding the climate change participation that we already introduced in the country. E agora como é que faço?
Agora é partilhar o ecrã.
Espera aí.
Partilhar o...
Ok. Ok. E aqui. Ok.
Could you please confirm that you can see the...
Can you see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. I'll show you some work we have been done in the, starting with the context, very briefly. Our context is important now because we are now living difficult times regarding climate change in all over Europe, but in Portugal, especially because of the lower rainfall, the higher temperature we have. Well, no, all these also impacts on water resources, high impact in coastal areas. And I put it there because Portugal now is in extreme drought, almost all the country. We are living, well, we just get out today, I think, of the second heat wave this summer. And we have forest fires, terrible forest fires affecting the whole territory now. So it's a very special moment for climate change issues regarding, well, civic society and also, of course, the politicians. I'll show you, I think it was Graham was talking about the concerning about climate change, and we can see in this last European Social Survey, this question, how concerned are you about climate change? You can see Portugal in the first place and then Spain. And of course, this is related directly because in 2017 we have had the terrible and fires with more than 100 people were killed, well, died in that fire. So everybody was very sensitive to this. But also, this is in Spain, of course, they have drought. In south of Europe, we are living this since some years ago. This is the last Eurobarometer from 2021, and of course climate change appears in these countries as the most worrying problem in the blue, the dark blue. You can see Portugal there too. Well, in the literature we have two main lines of adaptation to climate change. Well, simplifying, of course. A more instrumental approach with qualification and the consequences and creating adaptation toolkits. And then this socio-political approach with governments and politics of adaptation and the development and implementation of methods to engage communities in decision making. And this is what we have done here in Portugal, this socio-political approach. Implying governments, decision-making, stakeholder networks. Well, and these four principles are important because the climate change adaptation involves identifying problems, as we all know, vulnerabilities, impacts and priorities, and then finding answers, partners and stakeholders, organizing solutions through participation and dialogue, innovating processes of decision-making for adaptation, and I put the example at the municipal level because it was at the municipal level that we have been acting, having yet. So, and local, what we call localizing global ambitions. Well, recent academic literature also shows, as you all know, highlights the need to root transformative innovation and actions at local level. And to reach and increase larger scales, it is necessary to combine actions at the local level. And of course, you have told this already here today, but the relevance of municipalities' involvement is particularly important because of its proximity to problems and citizens. They have the mobilization capacity, and also they are mediators between citizens and central government. And in a country like Portugal, for instance, where we someone, I think it was Graham Schmidt that was saying that you are living in some countries in Europe 300 years of democracy, but we must remember that in Portugal, next year we make our 50 year of democracy. So it's very important. So it's very different in a way in regarding the European context. Portugal and Spain, but mostly Portugal, it's different when we look at what is the training in democracy, in the training in deliberative actions. We have to take in account that even so 50 years is not so much. Cities, of course, we all know, are taking the leadership on adaptation, and we have many examples. For instance, the C24, and then the Covenant of Mayors, and even in the COP26, as we have seen, mayors in countries like Brazil and in countries where you live in terrible times regarding policy, the dominant policy, the cities are becoming much and much important, like they were also at the U.S. during Trump era. I hope this era finished completely. But anyway, local actions build trust in action. In mayors, as you have said, I think it was Frank Fischer that underlines the role of the mayors, and the mayors are willing to take the leadership, mostly in our case. So we already work in some interdisciplinary projects on climate adaptation over the last decade, and they were interdisciplinary projects. With scientists from natural sciences and climatologists and from social sciences. And I put here this project Change. It was pioneering interdisciplinary project on coastal adaptation because as I have said, as you know, we have many problems regarding the coasts, many stretches of the coast in Portugal. So we design climate scenarios and promoting discussions with stakeholders. But I will focus on this other project, Climadapt Local, where we, it was also pioneer regarding the interdisciplinary project involving municipalities. We choose one of each intermunicipal community of the Portuguese territory. It was pioneering regarding stakeholder consultation at the nationwide level because, as we will see, it's a municipality in each. They are in the whole country, I think. I'll show you, and it's also pioneering climate adaptation municipal strategy and follow up by what we call local monitoring committees. Well, a sort of assembly. Local assembly that we have created in some municipalities, not in all. Here is the map of Portugal, and as you can see, we went to all these, a little bit all over the country, each one municipality from the intermunicipal communities. And this was aligned with the main aims of European strategy for adaptation to climate change, and intended to demonstrate that adaptation at the local level can be effectively implemented. So we choose 26 cities with local stakeholders engagement, making workshops with many participants, and I'll show you something. Here are the mayors. It's very important, the role of the mayors. So this is an image of the mayors signing a compromise with this adaptation. With this project and for establishing the strategy for climate change adaptation. And so we work with them, we involve the mayors, but also it was very important that we involve the municipal staff. This is the co-creation, the process of co-creation was with stakeholders, but also with the municipal staff, and this was key for the. When we look back to what we could get, this was key for the success of our project. This engagement model. We were based on the UKCIP, but of course we made some changes. The research approach was present. We have to study, and we had, all that team that studied with the municipal staff the present and future vulnerability scenarios in each region, involving each municipality. Priority assessment taking the climate change scenarios into account to each municipality. Develop a set of adaptation workshops. I'll talk a little bit about this. Articulation with local decision makers, with the technical staff and local communities, and engagement of the wider community in climate change adaptation. And then the co-creations of solutions and the continuity with that local committees that were not in the UKCIP, but it was very important for the continuity of this adaptation of these strategies to adapt to climate change at the municipal level. Well, our main goals in this stakeholder engagement was, let me see if I have here that. Well, we first of all, one very important thing was that we went people from social sciences. We went previously to all these places, and we tried to understand what were the main stakeholders in each municipality. Of course, we asked the technical staff, but that was not enough. Then we went to the field, and then we had, we identified, of course, people from the private sector, from schools, from different, from the NGOs, many different type of stakeholders, and it was even church. I don't know if you remember, but in 2015, Pope Francis came out with that Laudato Si encyclical, and they had to read, like in the military service, they have to read the priests, and so they knew they have a special. They were prepared to discuss also climate change. So all over the country, not in the south, because we have a big difference. This is Portugal. In the south of Portugal, we are not religious, and then in the center and the north, we have the religion is very important, but we involve them also. So it was very, it was very different stakeholders, and of course, one important thing, very important thing, is that we have had, of course, we are in Portugal. And if we were in Sweden, or if we were in a northern country, it would be enough to send an email. But in Portugal, you need to call people. We need to interact directly and say you are very important to this workshop and to discuss this. So we have one person that her job was calling to everyone and bringing everyone. So it was a success regarding participation. Almost all the people we have invited, they all come, and in very different. Of course, we had agriculture, we had fishermen, we have it depending of the municipalities, but we have a very good representation of the different type of stakeholders that we could identify. So, of course, the idea was to increase levels of knowledge, identify and clarify priorities, promote transparency in decision making, empower stakeholders, facilitate consensus building, encourage sharing of adaptation responsibilities, improve fairness, social justice, and legitimacy of adaptation decisions and actions. This is what you already mentioned in the previous presentations. And then the outcomes of the project. We have really built these 26 municipal adaptation strategies with specific measures to be adopted in each sector over the short, medium, and long term. We introduce and reinforce, of course, local participatory culture, enhance communication capacity. This is also very important in Portugal, because communication as democracy, it's not so old as in the other countries. So we need to work a lot in communication capacity. Help decode complexities. You already my previous colleagues talked about the importance of involving scientists and decoding complexities on climate change language and knowledge. Strengthen the confidence. This is also very important. I was reading yesterday a report from OECD where it shows that the Portuguese people are the ones who has less confidence in political parties, and of course in almost one of the countries with less confidence in political parties, and also in the institutions like justice and so on. So it's very important to work to strengthen trust and confidence. And local administration are very near people, so this proximity, it's good for this. And we need to do that and it's much more, I would say, much more successful if you do it at a local level than in the national level. Of course, co-production of knowledge is very important, and I'll show you how we have done this. In the strategies, I'll show you afterwards, paved the way of the continuity, and also the expanding process of adaptation in the continuity, because people in Portugal at least are a little bit, university comes to the, we have that projects with communities and so on, and university goes there, and then the project finishes and everything finishes. So we have to leave seeds on the field, and we have to ensure the continuity. So just to show you the workshop results, I won't show you because I'll take much time, but I will tell you what were the transverse axes. This axis was the issues proposed by the stakeholders. In our agenda, we came with the European strategy for adaptation to climate change, and those are the ones on the right hand, like territorial management in cities, water resources, security of people and goods, human health, energy industry, tourism, agriculture, forest and fishing, coastal areas, and biodiversity. These are the main sectorial axes of the national strategy that picked them from the European strategy. But then the stakeholders, they brought this transverse axis. It was their idea. It was not our idea at the beginning. Information, and they proposed because I think they felt it was very important. Information, something that now it's obvious, but at that time we didn't brought this. So information, education and communication, institutional training and empowerment, governance, because institutional training and empowerment is very important for them, for interaction, and governance in adaptation policies. So these were introduced in the strategies because the stakeholders proposed it. We established a political, and one thing that I would like to say, at the beginning we would start our workshops by showing the current and future vulnerabilities regarding climate change, and that was the result of the studies, of the work linking our scientists from climate change with the technical stuff. And the technical stuff presented the present and future scenarios and vulnerabilities regarding climate change in that area. So they present, and then we would discuss in our tables. We discussed the current, what people felt about these vulnerabilities, also because they were, and of course they were proposing measures and policies to face that vulnerabilities. So we will discuss the measures, and stakeholders would propose new measures, new ideas, new projects, new measures, new policies. And then we would also discuss future scenarios. And all of these three things, they were introduced in the strategies for the strategies for adaptation to climate change in all municipalities. And I must tell you, and of course, many of the ideas came from the stakeholders. And then I can talk a little bit about that. We had small fights with natural scientists, but we could get it. At the end, it was a very good result. Sometimes we had, so it was not easy, but it was a very good result. So the main outcomes of the project, we established a political and institutional commitment among local decision makers to create a post-project local adaptation strategy, assisted by that local committee that, as Graham said, could be a local assembly, composed by the stakeholders and the citizen representatives, and we in each of the 26 municipalities. And it was also very important, we established a net, that we articulate, because we were working with one municipality of each community intermunicipal, and so they can articulate with the others, with the neighbor and with the neighbor municipalities. And so we arrived to a creation of a municipal network for climate change adaptation, Adapt Local, that is growing. And also, this was very important last year, the creation of a new thematic area in the National Association of Portuguese Municipalities dedicated to climate action. And this is a new thing, and this was, of course, an outcome of this project, because it was pushed, it was pushed by the municipalities that were working with us in Adapt Local. And one of them is the president for this thematic area. Then, of course, we didn't make the law, but the law was prepared also with the law for climate, the climate framework law was prepared by all this work we have done before. And I put here the Article 9, which I think is very important, about citizen participation, and it establishes organized sessions to clarify and discuss climate policy. At least 30 organized citizens can request special clarification sessions from those responsible for climate policy decisions. This is a new thing. It didn't happen yet because the law just started in December last year, so it just started now, this year. But it will be very interesting to see what do the citizens will do regarding this law, because now they have the right to participate, they have the right to have the answers. And then the Article 14 that is dedicated to local and regional climate policies. All municipalities must approve a municipal climate action plan within the 24 months, let's say, until December 23, they have to have these plans, municipal plan, action plan. Also, just to finish some insights of that participatory methodology that we have used, and that you know, well, my previous colleagues already talked about this, but they really contributed to set a political agenda and raise awareness of climate adaptation. We can say this because we have applied surveys before, during, and afterwards, contributed to co-creation to innovative solutions and concrete projects. Some of these municipalities we create a very interesting dynamic with the stakeholders, and with very concrete projects regarding climate change. Promoted a strong articulation in climate science and policy, which is very important too. Generation of new governance and communication dynamics at the local level. To give you an idea, the coordinator of the Adapt Local was invited for the National Municipality of Climate Change that started to make a presentation about climate change, of course, but also about Adapt Local, our project. So continuity and ongoing is very important, like local municipal level, it's local committees involving stakeholders, that sort of climate assembly, as I've told you. Some of the 26 municipalities have created these local committees, some others didn't. For instance, Lisbon didn't create it, but Porto has it, and many others have created it. It was not obliged, but some of the mayors thought it was very interesting to create these local committees, and some of them are very active with these local committees. And we have a project we in some of the municipalities, we know every 3 months now with the COVID, it was not like this, but we retake it now again. We go to these assemblies, And we work with them, and we still keep on working with these stakeholders that are part of these local communities. Then it was very important too, the transversality of the climate change to different departments of the municipalities. This is very important because otherwise the other departments, they don't worry about climate change so much. So this was also very, it was one thing that we promote in our project. Then there is, now we create a sort of a predisposition to new dynamic projects at local level, and now we have been, it has been very successful, this project called Local SDG. Also interdisciplinary, with and we have already almost 80 municipalities, which means almost one third of the municipalities in Portugal working with us for the SDG, local SDGs. So the dynamic was created. And to finish, just some insights, participation in governance and social change. Well, the proper process of social change, as we know, civic participation reveals to be crucial. Because we are increasing knowledge on local adaptation and empowering stakeholders to influence adaptation and decision-making processes. So informed citizenship is crucial, as Roberto now is doing in Lisbon with this new mechanism, which is very interesting because it's a new mechanism that can also go to other municipalities. It's a pilot example that can spread to the country. Then permanent mechanism of mediation to mobilize participation, ensuring that civil society obtains feedback. Feedback is also very important. Otherwise, people give up. Then facilitating consensus building and creating synergies, considering, of course, social diversity and the complexity of competing interests on the ground, because you don't have all these stakeholders that don't have the same ideas, of course, in the same projects, in the same, they want different things from the territory, so you have to deal with this, with the difference of the different groups. And time is needed to create trust and social change dynamics. Time is a key issue. It's very important. We need time to involve people and to get to results. Then, of course, trust and continuity. Scientific communication builds trust, and the cooperative science enables common visions and goals. And the participatory methodology created a trust engagement process, as we have seen with the previous colleagues. The methodologies have strengthened the confidence of the local administration and institutions. Of course, it's also important. It's important that people trust in the administration, but it's also very important that local administration trusts in people too. So this interaction, it's very, very useful. And of course, these participatory methodologies that we are using have introduced and reinforced the local participatory culture. And thank you. That's all. Thank you very much. Vou interromper. Pronto. Agora fica aqui?
Sim, é mais fácil. Okay, sim. Well, thank you very much. A lot of ideas. I would spend the next couple of hours just asking questions. I may, but I won't. So maybe I would first give the stage to people here in the room, whether they have questions, comments, something that you would like also, to say, to share from your experience. This is a very, for you who are online, this is a very mixed public. So some of them are researchers, some other are civil servants from the national institutions and local authorities. Some other practitioners, students, activists. So it's a mixed one. So, is anyone? Yeah, please. Let me give you the mic because of the. For them to.
Put the microphone.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for your presentations.
Just one second.
Okay.
First, try to speak.
Okay.
Check if
A
you can
little bit louder. Okay.
Can you hear?
Just
Okay.
about.
Yes? Okay. Thank you. Thank you all for your presentations. I have a couple of questions. One is about your ideas to how to institutionalize these assemblies of citizens or citizens' assembly. The other is for Thailand. And I didn't quite understand how the participatory governance project was born, if it was born by the will of the mayor, or it was a group of citizens that initiated the process. And I would like also to know if they think it can be replicated in other municipalities regarding the dictatorship, or if it won't be a problem. I don't know if this town or this city in particular has some characteristics of the fight against the control and all that made it possible. Regarding, I have one more question. I don't know if it's too much for Luísa. What do you think about the continuous movement in the municipalities that participated in Claim Adapt? Because some of them are, yes, continuing the process, Lole and others, but others, I don't think they are. I don't know what do you think about what failed there or something. Thank you.
In case you had problems in hearing everything, I will wrap up in a second. But before that, I wanted to know if someone else wanted to ask a question. Okay. Yeah. We can do a couple of rounds. Yeah.
Hello. Thank you for presentations. How do you do, if you do, about how do you deal with diversity of the technicians assisting the working groups of citizens during the assemblies? Because, as you said, you take care about diversity of citizens, but how about diversity on technicians? Of course, knowledge areas, knowledge levels, ethnicity, gender. And if Professor Plyapong, if you can say a little bit more about the composition of your think tank in Thailand.
Thank you. Yeah.
While we're here, yeah. Thank you very much. This was so interesting, and thanks for organizing. So I have two questions. The first one, Professor Schmidt, at one point you said how the ideas that emerge from these councils are often much more progressive, much more advanced in terms of what they suggest than what the mainstream policy is, what is actually suggested by the governments. So just what does this say to us in terms of representative democracy, in terms of participatory approaches, in terms of just, let's say, what we're pushing from below, right? How we're trying to enter mainstream politics. This is just very interesting for me. And another thing is, again, related to these staff, to municipal staff and people that we actually want to take up these ideas and these conclusions and somehow introduce them into actual political tools, right? Because from my experience, and I've been a researcher and an activist and focusing a lot on the Balkans actually, and now also working on Portugal. But my experience as someone who has been trying to do this is that it's very difficult to get people interested, because people who work in municipalities often see this as an additional labor. And so then what do we do? Like, do we somehow introduce something from the top down and actually make these people do this? Tell them this is your obligatory part of your work now. Like, how exactly? Because it's nice, it's great if you actually have people who understand you and share your progressive values and are concerned about climate change and so who work in municipalities. But when people in municipalities just want to finish their work from 9 to 5, how do we actually get them to do more work that is needed to be done in order to make all of this, actually go forward? Thank you so much for your thoughts.
Thank you, Sonia. Can we just maybe we can have a second round and let the speakers, the keynote. You can keep the mic if you want, and then okay. So I can see Professor Graham Schmidt. I don't know, Frank, Fischer, Plyapong, Boossabong. Are you? Okay. So just to be sure that you could catch all the questions. Plyapong, can you please confirm if you managed to listen? But I can sort of wrap up the main ones. So there is a question about the institutionalization of citizen assemblies. There's another question for you, Professor Plyapong, about how was this participatory governance mechanisms set up? So whether it was from citizens, the government was, if you could elaborate a little bit more on that. And also whether there is an idea of replicating this experience in other cities. Then there is a question for Luísa, about the commitment of the cities in the projects. Then a couple of questions on civil servants. One is about the diversity of civil servants, how to deal with different degrees of knowledge, commitment, and also gender questions, age questions. So, the diversity in a very broad sense, but also how to get their interest. This was the last question. So how to engage civil servants in bureaucracy, which works in similar ways in democracies. And then also another question, it was a question comment, which is about the, I understand is the degree of innovation brought about by these assemblies and other participatory settings, since Professor Schmidt said that actually the ideas that are shared in these settings are quite more progressive than we can normally expect. So these are more or less the questions. I would give the floor to Graham and then pass to Plyapong and Frank. Thank you.
Thank you. A lot of these questions are pointing to things that we're trying to do work on at the moment, so I don't necessarily have sort of well-defined answers. One thing I want to say, and I think it's quite an interesting distinction between the kinds of assemblies that I was talking about and the kind of assemblies that Plyapong and Frank and Louisa were talking about, that they are very different types of spaces. So, and that brings with it different types of problems or different types of challenges. So the kinds of spaces I'm talking about are spaces that are designed specifically to protect citizens, to provide a space for citizens to deliberate and make decisions and make recommendations, or decisions actually. There are examples of these where they are final decision making, with the input of external actors, whether it's public administration, whether it's interest groups, whether it's scientific experts, but the space is held for the citizens to make their own recommendations. And I think that's qualitatively different. And I think the type of thing that we're referring to, particularly in the Thailand example, is like a mechanism of mass mobilization. And again, I think that's different here. This is much more about, the assemblies I'm talking about are much more about trying to create spaces for public wisdom or public judgment. And I think it is an issue for assemblies because that is their focus. And we often don't actually we don't really know what to do with the participants afterwards. So I just want to make clear that there's a difference between these sort of deliberative assemblies that I'm talking about and these kind of more broader mobilisation, and they are just different, and they're going to have different issues associated with them, and I think that's important. And I think that has important differences in terms of what it means to institutionalise them, and what that institutionalisation might look like. I think there are really interesting ways of doing that, but I think it comes out, and this relates to the final question, moves us away from the standard operating procedure of public administrations. On that, I think actually this is a really key question. There are these people, and I'm sure the same is true in Thailand and in Lisbon and in Portugal more widely. There are these people who drive these things. There are the sort of policy entrepreneurs, there are the sort of ambassadors and the advocates. And those people are the committed people and various political actors. And then you've got the people whose everyday jobs are being affected by these decision-making processes. What I know is the worst thing you can do is the situation where that report lands on their desk without them knowing anything about it. I know that is a really bad thing to do. I think everybody can agree with that. The question in terms of how you bring those people into the process is really challenging. But making just very simple things about holding workshops, making people aware that this stuff is coming down the line so that people can be prepared for it, just very simple things can make a really big difference. So that the person doesn't, the civil servant or the political actor just doesn't suddenly receive this without any knowledge. As I said at the start, we have spent so much of our attention on getting the participatory deliberative process right, and almost nothing on helping administration. And that's so I'm really saying we're at the early days on this, but all I know is actually bringing people in early. And I think here, the kinds of processes that Plyapong and Frank are talking about, and perhaps also Luísa, have an advantage because they are actually designed to bring those civil servants into the process iteratively. I'm not saying one is better than the other. I think they're different types of processes and they have different types of roles. I wasn't quite sure about the diversity question in relation. Was that about the diversity of facilitators and the diversity of people who are giving input? So I didn't really catch that.
Yeah, diversity of technicians giving inputs to the participants. If it is...
so I can't hear you, Roberto, your mic's not on.
Yeah, is it? Sorry.
Too many buttons.
Yeah, diversity of technicians giving insights, mediating the workshops, the discussions, if you are concerning about that.
Okay, so the main concern, so I think this is again a difference between the different formats we're talking about. In climate assemblies, the real key is getting the diversity of participants. So you know, in terms of using stratified random sampling, there are question marks about, for example, ensuring that certain types of experience are heard, which may not be captured by sort of classic expert knowledge. And I think that is a real challenge for assemblies to try and ensure that you hear from people from marginalised groups, you hear from people who are at the front line of climate change, because the tendency is just to bring in a professor from the local university or whatever. And I think recognising that there are different types of knowledge, there's kind of technical expert knowledge, there is kind of advocacy expert knowledge, and there are experiential expert knowledge, and recognising that we have to manage that. And I think, again, this is an area where assembly practice really has to develop. And I was really striking with the Irish Assembly, which was also looking at things like same-sex marriage and was looking at abortion. Actually, the experiential evidence was really critical for people in that, to be able to talk to people who are in same-sex marriages when they'd never met people like that before. So, I think we underplay the importance of experiential knowledge in this. And again, I think this may be an example where the processes that Frank and Plyapong and Luísa are talking about may be better here, because they create spaces for that. But it's a really interesting and intriguing question. I don't think I answered any of those very well. Sorry.
Thank you, Graham. Frank and Plyapong, would you like to say something?
Do you want to say something, Frank? Are you there?
Yeah. We can hear you.
Okay. The first question is very difficult to answer who initiate the process, but I just observed it's going to be a very important link. In the 2010, the mayor and his team, I would say a lot of municipal staff has scholarship from the central government. It's a kind of the program that they want to enhance the education of local government. And that's why the central government pay a lot of money for local government staff to study in the kind of special program provided by the university. And at that time, 2010, there was the establishment of the group of young scholars, which is called the Khon Think Tank, which most of them graduate from abroad. I mean, the young scholar in Thailand mostly gain scholarship from the government to study abroad, because as most of the global south, I mean, the government usually think that we need to build the knowledge by transfer the knowledge from the West. So that's why they spend a lot, including me, to be honest. I also received the government scholarship to study in England. So it's very common for a lot of young scholars. So they have a lot of experience, and the relationship that they create with the municipality is like professor and alumni. And that's why they influence a lot in the sense that they introduce international experience, especially at that time, as you can imagine, there's a lot of citizen juries, a lot of citizen assembly, a lot of the practice of collaborative planning, which and including the planning cell and so on in Europe, especially in Europe, and town hall meeting in the US. So that's why they introduced this idea to the mayor. Actually, the mayor is the student. So that's why they can develop this together. I would say develop this together. And you may not believe, but the mayor actually he need to concern about the re-election. And what he can learn from this is that when he developed this deliberative mechanism, the spiral deliberation, in the end of the day, he turned to be very popular, and he can be success in the re-election for 2 times already. I mean, even Thailand, we dominate by military, but in local level, the local government has been elected by local people, but of course with the limit power. And he learned 2 things. The first thing is that with this he can be re-elected because he engaged people, and people very happy with this. And the second thing, he can refer to the will of the people to negotiate, as I already mentioned, the power of the local government in Thailand very, very limited, just basic service. So for example, actually the critical point is about to push forward the public transportation That's actually the first issue that create the first town hall meeting and the first mini publics in Khon Kaen to push forward public transportation in this city, which actually beyond the power of the local government. So the local government want to refer to the will of the people to negotiate with the central government. So it's mostly related to political strategy, to be honest. Yeah, but and another one asks about the practice in other cities. Actually, I already moved from that city to another city. It's in the north of Thailand called Chiang Mai. Many of you might already know that. The same people, who have the same knowledge. But what I try to do here, I try to assimilate deliberative process into the municipality in Chiang Mai, but never succeed. I think it's very important to talking about a kind of ecosystem. As Grant Schmidt already mentioned, it's very important to point that out. Even active think tank want to make this happen, but it doesn't mean that we're going to make it happen if the municipality not really active to do this. So we still fail to do that, but we aim to enhance the the deliberative capacity of the municipality. Something that I need to make it clear. It's a long way to be the same way with the practice in the West, in Europe, to be honest. It's not only about authoritarian regime here, but actually it's also about authoritarian culture. So if people can learn and can want to engage and want to raise their voice, but most of the time, if the municipality, the political leader in the area not start doing this, it's very difficult to, the ecosystem, very important. Someone need to create the ecosystem first. It's very difficult to see people from the grassroots, from the bottom, struggle and want to make this happen and change the mindset of the government. I think it's very difficult here. So it seems to be, it's not top down like that, but it needs to start with the mayor. I think it's very important. The mindset of the leader, the political leader in the context of my country. Maybe Frank, which actually he also be here many times in Thailand to observe this and learn along the way together with me. Maybe you want to add something, Frank? Are you there?
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. I don't know.
Okay.
Frank,
yeah. I hope I answer some question that I captured from the audience.
Yeah. I would like. I don't know if Frank wants to add something, but I can't.
I'm here, but
okay.
I am here, but I don't think I need to add anything to that.
Okay.
That was good.
Thank you, Frank. Luísa.
Okay. Thank you for the questions. So starting with Carla, of course, some municipalities keep on doing, and they did the monitoring, that commission, that sort of assembly of citizens. Some others they don't. But anyway, it depends of the mayor. It depends a lot of the mayor and of the technicians, of the technical staff that is involved. Because we know that, the elections, we have elections and the mayors, they go away, but the technicians, the staff stay there. So it's very important to deal with that staff, and they can push the mayor in many cases. In other cases, of course, it's not, we had 26 municipalities, so it was not generalized, but they even create regulatory terms. Some of them signed, they identified stakeholders. In some places it goes very well. Then another good thing is that now with this new group, they created this new national municipal, the Association National Municipal, the National Municipal Assembly of all the municipalities. This is a new thing. They create that group for climate change and the group for the SDG. And of course, it was the dynamic that was created by this project was crucial, because the mayors who brought this to the assembly, to that National Assembly, they were working with us in climate adapt local, either now in the SDG, at local SDG. So it was, now they have to do it, and now all the municipalities have to do something. Some of them are already prepared, but of course it depends of the mayors, it depends of the technicians, and now this interesting dynamic that this National Assembly and the law, the national law, brought to this. And of course Lisbon didn't do at that time. But at Lisbon, I talked a lot at that time with the representative for environment and so on. They didn't create that commission, but now they're doing the Assembly Council. So it's a way to continue. So, and the interest stayed there, and of course the technicians are very good there in Lisbon, and they keep on, they did the plan already, so everything is going now with this part of the Council of Citizens that is now getting very important in Lisbon. Then the other questions, diversity of the technicians, diversity of technicians that you asked. It was very important two things. Diversity of the researchers. We had climatologists, we had geographers, we had engineers, but we also had historians and sociologists and anthropologists. And this is very good for giving a context also more active, more real. Not only that climatologist that speaks like it was very important this. Communication and this decodification of the complex problems. Then another thing, the diversity of the technicians, of the technical staff of the municipalities. As I said, we involve the technical staff. Of course, they were working in environment or in territorial management, but then it was transversalized through surveys. We made surveys to all the technicians, and they were invited for the workshop too, some of them. So it's very important to involve them because they have the power. Imagine there are people that deal with urban decisions, for instance, or the financial decisions. They need to be there. And they need to be involved. It's not easy, but it has to be. Then going to your questions about the how to deal with the technicians, and they are already too busy, so it's difficult. We had never had that problem, because it's it's funny because it depends of if they believe. Well, sometimes some of these technicians, this technical staff, is involved in this issue, and is not heard. Nobody hears him. That's one thing very important. And then suddenly, if they get more power, if the mayor hears, if the representatives of the municipality are there, they get power inside the municipalities. This is very important. So they get power in the sense of they are heard now. People take in account what they say and what they know.
Exactly. I think in some presentations it was mentioned that these initiatives can actually strengthen the importance of certain political ideas. And it's great when this match happens, someone who is really, really passionate in a local government and then people on the other side. That's really good.
Yeah. And they get very enthusiastic in general. And even with this local SDG, it's very interesting how they get so enthusiastic. So it's because it's a different thing and because also they can be heard inside in a much more effective way. Then there is another question, I think. The ideas of stakeholders. Someone asked that, I don't know. Well, I give you two or three examples very interesting. For instance, we involve the agriculture, the agricultures in some the farmers in some places inside the country. And one of the things that I remember very well because it was very funny, because of climate change, the olives came mature much earlier. And how do you say os lagares, the place where you treat, where you make the olive oil, they used to open later. So there was and with this interaction, they start to open earlier. This is a very interesting example because of the experience of the farmers saying, no, the things are getting much. It's the olives and the fruit and everything is getting mature much earlier. So we need to change the schedule of the place where they make the olive oil. Those kind of things. Also the fishermen, and also for instance a tax in Algarve. The tourism tax was suggested by the stakeholders, and they kept them. So it was very interactive in that sense, and people that are in the field that are working with all these problems, in daily problems, they have the knowledge and they transmit in a very easy way. And interacting in a very easy way, you decide immediately. It's very interesting because we are very bureaucratic in Portugal, as we all know. So having an ombudsman, it would be very important for us in Lisbon. But as we are very bureaucratic, instead of writing a letter to saying, we need this open... No, it was immediately solved. That's very interesting. So the direct interaction was also very, very creative and effective.
Okay. Thank you, Luísa. We are running a little bit out of time, so I wanted to ask, I think Inês wanted to ask a question. If you have very short questions, because then we have to,
Hi. So I think we all focus a lot on how important it is to include the technicians and the representatives in the process, and it appears that in Thailand that worked out very well. I am interested, or I'm curious about how you appreciate the levels of interest of the citizens throughout the process, because it was a very long process, the spiral. And other two things is, how diverse was this group at the end of the process, or were they maybe more supporters of the mayor, because this was a mayor initiative? So how was throughout the process you maintain diversity among the participants? And the last thing is, how horizontal were those decisions going through the process? Because when you include officials, elected officials, perhaps there is a problem for lay citizens to have space to include their concerns. So I was also interested in that. Maybe it's a lot, so just answer what you can. Thank you.
Thank you, Inês. And there is another question.
Okay.
Short, please.
Okay, I'm going to try to be short. Thank you for your presentation. I think it was quite interesting to hear more about the case study in Thailand, and also about the outcomes of the Climate Adapt Local project. I have a question just because I'm curious about the Lisbon City Council. I just wanted to know if you have the possibility to do it again, if you have like 3 things that you will do again, or that you will change. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, let's first see Inês' questions, the first 3 questions. Maybe Frank and Plyapong want to say something about... you have to unmute yourself, Frank. Let me, maybe I can do it. No.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah.
Just a quick comment. I want to support Graham's point about public administration. I think this is a crucial point. I spent quite a few years trying to teach ideas about deliberation, citizens' juries, and the like in a public administration program, but it always ran up against a chair of the department who didn't see the point. He was the equivalent to the other government municipalities that weren't interested. But one thing that I thought, I mean, actually, to put it sort of painfully, embarrassingly, they thought it was some kind of European idea that you don't need in the US. But I think an important part is for it to work is you need an outside event going on, a citizen assembly of some kind that's real, that you can point to. Otherwise, it remains abstract. But I think dealing with the public administration is crucial. Plyapong can speak to the other points.
Just want to highlight that the whole process is actually a part of the annual planning, which all municipality need to do that. But this municipality try to make the planning process and budgeting process be more participatory orientation, or we can call participatory budgeting. So that's why people usually feel that they want to engage, because their voice from proposing the particular project and prioritize the budget gonna be matter. That's why a community member want to engage into the process. And actually, it's not the long process. As you can imagine, to do the strategic planning, annual planning, and to do budgeting, actually it spend time. They just incorporate people from the beginning to make this. And in the end of the day, people gonna have the project with budget that they prioritize, has a chance to prioritize. And I think as it is exactly the process toward participatory budgeting, people want to engage from the beginning. Everyone want to propose something and direction of the city and the money that there are local tax that people need to pay. So they feel that they need to steering the money that they spend. Yeah.
Thank you. I don't know if Graham wants to add something, or Luísa also. No. I don't know if
we can't hear you, Roberto.
Sorry. just asking if you wanted to add something, or if you. Okay.
I just think that just reinforce the issue that the people in the room are pointing to, which is this, and which Frank is just about how we just need to be much more aware of trying to work on the public administration side. We put so much money into these public engagement projects, but we don't put the same amount of resources and energy into thinking about how we reconstitute and how we revitalize public administration to deal with it. Otherwise, what one of your colleagues said is, it's another thing that people have got to do. Unless that's actually integrated into their work, then I can't see how this is going to work out. This is really sad, because many of us left public administration to go and work in participatory democracy, and now we're all being dragged back into public administration again.
Yeah.
Just answering Inês a little bit. When you ask them if they are diverse, the citizens who are involved, and for instance, we have, me and Carla, we have that project now in Lolé, for instance. It's a municipality that we keep on working at the commission, local commission, and of course diversity is there, keeps being there, and from different parties. We could see that people it was last month that we went there for the meeting of that commission, and different parties were there. And one thing that I think it's very important, at least in Portugal, is that in Portugal the national elections are different from the local elections, and as we know, the logic of the parties is not so high at the local level. So people vote in the personality of more of the mayor than, well, not always. In Lisbon it was a little bit different this time. But anyway, people vote on the personality more than in the national elections. So this is very important for the personality of the mayor. And of course, we take in account, but it doesn't matter. It's not needed, because naturally the other people from other parties go there. So it's very diverse. One thing that I forgot to say that I think it's very important for what Graham Schmidt says about how do we bring people from everyday jobs, and one of the things that I think is crucial, at least in our experience, is to involve schools of different levels, like involving the teachers and also young people from the schools, from the secondary schools, and those teachers. If you involve these people in the projects and directly in these meetings, and we make the difference, because as we know, then the children take the message and the worries and everything to they're like. They are very important to involve these everyday jobs people who are not directly, sometimes they don't represent stakeholders and so on. So schools are a key place also for this.
Thank you all for these final remarks. I will just use 1 minute, because I know that we are running very much out of time, but I wanted to thank you again. Thanks to Graham, Frank, Plyapong, and Luísa. Thanks to all of you. I know that this was hard, because it's very hot in Portugal, and we have a problem at the institute at the moment. We have no air condition, so it's like, but no, it was very, very, very interesting. I don't want to keep, my final remarks on a very general terms. I want to say that I was writing down some notes during your speech, and I can see at least 5 very key topics that I would like to address in the next few days. Also taking advantage of the Citizen Assembly in Lisbon. The first one is the issue of scale. Graham referred to basically to national experiences, but then we have the local in Thailand, we have the local also in Portugal. So the question is, how does the national and the local scales work with the citizen assemblies? But then we have also the experience shared by Luísa, which is interesting, which is a network from the local to the national. So maybe there is not really a dichotomy. We have to think on how also the locals can scale up their experiences. The second issue is about the scope. This is something that you mentioned, but not, to me, is still something that is not totally clear. And let me put it in this way, whether the citizen assemblies have to do with laws or with policies. To me, this is still a little bit confused from Lisbon, because when I look at the recommendations made by citizens, in some cases they want to influence lawmaking, in other cases they want to influence policy making, and I wonder whether this has to do with, this should be maybe more worked in the future, even in the relationship between the public authority, which is promoting the citizen assembly, and citizens. What sort of recommendations the public authority is ready to work on? The third one is about the ecosystem, and thanks for pointing this out. So the ecosystem of participatory and deliberative processes working with the engagement of citizens on climate change, which also means mixing publics. But this raises challenges the diversity, the power, the horizontality of decision making. So how, when we mix publics, deliberation works. And let me stress also that there is an actor that maybe we didn't really address today, which is activists. Because in Thailand, you said that in the city is very well known for the pro-democrats movement, which is of course very important in that context. But actually, how does activism enter these assemblies? I mean, how can we deal with movements? The fourth is it's maybe a marginal one, but it's interesting, the role of religion. I was very impressed on something that Plyapong said about the role of also Buddhism in promoting the harmony between environment and citizens, and then also Luísa mentioned the role of churches in Portugal. So I'm wondering also on the drivers, other drivers than not merely, political institutions. And the last one is public administration, of course. I mean, the key actors. It's a provocation. I mean, of course, the key actors are citizens in this. But actually, the role of public administration, how relevant is to better prepare public administrations to these processes. I'm sorry because I'm saying the final words, but I organized the meeting, so I want to take the stage at the end. Thank you again very much. Let's keep in touch. Thank you, really, really thank you. And
thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you.